Welcome to Book Club and to our guest this month, Martin Amis. He says on the first page of his autobiography, it does the author good to meet the reader. So we hope it does you good today. This month's readers are gathered round us here in Broadcasting House, their copies of London Fields in their hands. That's the Amis book we've been reading. It's in paperback, like all our choices in Book Club, of course, from Vintage. We had a vast choice with our prolific guest, everything from the Rachel Papers in 1973, which won the Somerset Maugham Award for him when he was only 24, through Money to Time's Arrow and so on. But we've chosen this because it's a fascinating book, a murder mystery of sorts, a book which has many Amis characteristics, a wildly intrusive narrator, a complicated twisting of relationships among the central characters, a savage sense of the failings of the world in which they all live. This is 80s London, in a sense. It was written in the 80s, but it looks ahead to a period about 10 years on. It's raw and pretty unforgiving. The title, of course, is ironic. Martin Amis, welcome to Book Club. The narrator is wildly intrusive. People who haven't finished the book should know the narrator does actually discuss things with the characters in the book all the time. So there's a very deliberate artifice there, which is, in many ways, the book's structure. How important was that to you when you conceived the idea of London Fields?
I knew it would be kind of interactive in that sense. Novelists vary in how much free will they allow their characters. Ian Foster used to line up his characters in an imaginary way before beginning a book, and he'd say to them, "No larks." Nabokov was very shocked when he heard this, and he said, "My characters cringe when I come near," he said. "I've seen whole avenues of imagined trees lose their leaves with terror as I approach." In other words, he doesn't give them any liberties at all. They're slaves in his scheme of things. I'm much nearer Foster, or even more permissive. I felt very much that Nicola Six was, in a way, writing this novel with me. And I would sometimes, as the narrator does, appeal to her and say, how do I get round this particular little wobble in the plot? Give me some ideas. And I felt that she was there and was giving me the ideas in a way that I've never felt in a novel before.
Let's pick up Nicola. What did people make of Nicola?
I read recently that you said when you read the feminist Gloria Steinem, you changed your mind about women. What was it that she said about women that made you change your mind? And I wonder whether you would have written Nicola in quite the same way had you read Gloria Steinem before you had written London Fields.
I did read her before. Gloria Steinem turned me into a feminist by the simple means of transposing the sexes. She asks you to put yourself in a position across the gender divide. And to quote her, I think the piece is called "If Men Had Babies." He said, if men had babies, abortion would be a sacrament, she said, and that it would be socially very attractive to menstruate, and men would high-five each other and say, "Hey, man, you're looking good. Yeah, man, I'm on a rag." But when you think this through in all contexts which have to do with equity and justice, it's unanswerable. And actually, I was a feminist when I wrote Money, which I think is actually too programmatic a feminist book, although, of course, it was denounced as sexist at the time. But I can still believe that and, want to go into these areas where alarm bells ring. Now, a politicized reader will send the book windmilling through the air on about page 15 when they see that it's about a death wish, a dramatized death wish. But I can do without politicized readers. They're not good readers. When they come across the word rape or, anything of that kind, alarm bells go off deafeningly in their head, and they cease to be readers. They are just political registers.
Let's carry on talking about Nicola, because she's a fascinating figure in many ways. She's a kind of fantasy figure to the men in the plot, isn't she? What do the men think about that?
I found her a very one-dimensional character, not really a believable person. I wondered whether that was your intention, that she was a sort of construct of the male fantasy, not a person who really exists in reality.
She's various things to various men. to Guy Clinch, she pretends she's a virgin and behaves in a kind of, well, a radio play kind of way. With Keith, she's a houri. So she puts on the face that she thinks will be effective, will be powerful, and she does the same with the narrator.
Do you like her?
I adore her. Yeah. I think
What is
she's
it?
great.
What is it that attracts you? Is it this ability? Is it this ability to be everything to everybody, and indeed to be the manipulative figure at the centre of the book?
By her behaviour, she wonderfully satirizes certain male illusions, the romantic illusions of Guy and the socio-sexual illusions of Keith. And it's very good satire. I mean, she makes continuous chumps of all the men, including the narrator. So I admire her theatrical talent and her satirical intelligence.
And in that sense, she succeeds, of course, doesn't she?
Utterly, yes.
I don't think the male characters in the book are even aware that she is manipulating them until much later on, of course, as far as Guy is concerned. And I think that's the irony of it as well.
Yes, I mean, they think they're completely in charge, or at least playing on a level playing field. And she deceives the narrator right up to the last page.
I would like to ask a question about predestination of Nicola as the murderee. And I wondered whether that you thought that by seeing the victim as somehow predestined to be murdered, it reduced the power of the murderer and rendered him almost...
He's a prop.
Worthless.
Yes. I wondered where I got the idea from, and I thought I'd seen it in a newspaper, this idea of the murderee, but in fact it's in Lawrence, it's in Women in Love.
Because what happens to Nicola is she decides that she is going to be murdered at a particular time, and it's this... it's the elapsing of this time that makes the book, that gives it its shape.
Yes, it's not a whodunit, it's a who'll do it. But as you say, it's as if she removes free will from the men who circle around her because she is absolutely in control in ways that surprised even me.
It's interesting because you're dealing in this novel with a sense of time, both in the way that there's the ticking of the clock. Murder is meant to happen on her 35th birthday, she's convinced. You're also writing at a time in the late 80s where you're deliberately looking ahead a decade and trying to picture a world because of things that are happening around you. To what extent do you want the world around to be a central player in the book?
Well, I think my three longest novels are all set in London, and they are London novels. I do very much want and expect the city to be a presence in the book, and to stand for all cities, at this stage.
What did people make of the London of 1999 envisaged in 1989? Did it feel like the London of 99 to you? Even those of you from Harrogate.
Yes, I think so.
Did it?
But is it
Yeah.
as you imagined it would turn out? Or do you think 10 years, 11 years, 12 years on, London has fared better than you were predicting when you wrote the book? Or is it as you imagined?
It's cleaner than I thought it would
Yes.
be.
Oh, shit.
Because you were pretty despairing about the prospects, weren't you?
Well, it's not real despair. Perhaps you despair 10 minutes a week, and those are the 10 minutes you expand to fill all space. So it doesn't reflect, exactly how I feel about London, but it's the idea of the entropy and winding down. And it was a fair, bet that London was going to deteriorate further. But I mean, some things I got embarrassingly wrong, like mobile phones. Still, in my book, a great rarity and novelty.
What I was just going to say was, what about Concorde?
Concorde didn't make it. No, Concorde collapsed just after.
Just after you.
the next
I think you
year,
got
yeah.
Concorde just in.
Oh,
Just
right.
in time.
Just about, yeah.
I just wondered how much of London Fields was generated by this sense of kind of end of 20th century angst, kind of all these bizarre things are going on with the weather, everything seems to be kind of on the brink of meltdown the whole time, and there's a sort of a very real fear driving a lot of the plot that everything's just going to go horribly wrong. How much was that something that you really felt?
I really felt it, and I think I still do feel it. I think, particularly biblical weather, I think is going to be a big feature of 21st century life.
I'm interested in these men about whom we spoke a moment ago. We've talked about Nicola a little bit. Keith and Guy. Now, one is romantic in a sort of fairly familiar way. The other, Keith, is romantic in a much more revolting way, I think it's fair to say. Is that
not romantic?
Fair? Well, let's not argue about the word romantic. He's revolting. Did anybody have the least bit of sympathy for Keith in his sort of awkward pursuit?
Yeah, and I actually sort of thought that you did as well. I thought he was a brilliant comic invention, very grotesque, but he came across as the most vividly human and uncomfortably so to me at times as well.
You know people like that, do you?
I wouldn't say they're close friends, but... and I just felt at times that your sympathies seemed more closely aligned to him than to other characters, and I wondered what you had felt about him as a character.
I adored him. I adore all my characters.
You see, I think there's the sense that you might move more in Guy's circles than Keith's. That would be the assumption lying behind it, I think.
Well, I've always written about low life. I feel I understand it for some reason. I think You've
tried to dive into it from time to time in your own experience, haven't you?
When I was younger, yeah. And it has its own comedy and its own pathos and beauty. Keith is by far the most popular character I've ever created. Not by far, with John Self as a close second. And these are, by any standards, disgraceful human beings. But John Updike speculated about why we like villains. Why do we like Becky Sharp, and he said it's not a straightforward matter. What we like in literature is life. And if the character's alive, then we like it no matter what strain of alive they are. And Keith is definitely that.
Let's try to get a flavour of Keith, because there's a wonderful passage in the book where he's going a-burgling with Thelonious. Give us a few paragraphs of this.
Okay. Thelonious is a black criminal. And I don't make up many names, but Thelonious has a brother called Nefarious. And if you pronounce with the Cockney F for TH, then the brothers are called Thelonious and Nefarious. 15 minutes, Thelonious was saying sleepily, and we'd be back in a Black Cross, rich men. On the way, Thelonious rehearsed his dreams of early retirement, the ticker-taped, blonde-flanked return to St. Lucia, land of his fathers, the ranch-style villa, the private beach, the burnished helipad. No moon, no street lamps, and a low ceiling of cloud. The lock gave slickly to Thelonious's key. Bingo, said Keith. Little did they know that the place they were about to burgle, the shop and the flat above it, had already been burgled the week before. Yes, and the week before that. And the week before that. It was all burgled out. Indeed, burgling, when viewed in Darwinian terms, was clearly approaching a crisis. Burglars were finding that almost everywhere had been burgled. Burglars were forever bumping into one another, stepping on the toes of other burglars. There were burglar jams on rooftops and stairways, on groaning fire escapes. Burglars were being burgled by fellow burglars and were doing the same thing back. Burgled goods jigged from flat to flat. Returning from burgling, burglars would discover that they had been burgled, sometimes by the very burglar that they themselves had just burgled. How would this crisis in burgling be resolved? It would be resolved when enough burglars found burgling a waste of time and stopped doing it. Then, for a while, burgling would become worth doing again. But burglars had plenty of time to waste. It was all they had plenty of, and there was nothing else to do with it, so they just went on burgling.
A picture in some ways that we all recognise for different reasons, I've no doubt, as we go around the room. If you look at one of the good characters in the book, I suppose, Good Guy, it doesn't help him being good very much, does it?
Oh no, I mean it's a terrible disqualification in this world. But on the other hand, he's selfishly pursuing a romantic entanglement, and although his home life is portrayed in a way that makes you think that he should stick around necessarily, he's got a very cold wife and an unbelievably unmanageable little boy. But nonetheless,
it's also a goodie, though.
Marmaduke.
In the end. Well, isn't he going to be all right in the end? I mean, he's dreadful. He's the child from hell at the beginning.
Well, he's still the child from hell at the end. I mean, his job is to contrast with little Kim, Keith Tennant's daughter, who is a kind
Wonderful.
of angelic figure. And she's all right. I mean, people ask me...
Marmaduke will never be all right.
Marmaduke, I think, is going to have a rough ride, but people ask me, what happens to them after the book is over? And my guess is, and it's no more than a guess, because oddly they regain free will when the book is over. But Keith is more or less a tramp now, but Kim and Kath are fine, and they never see him, but they're perfectly okay once removed from his toxic presence.
You once described J.G. Ballard's Crash as being full of style and devoid of moral content. Where would you place the moral centre of London Fields?
In the little girl, really, and in the narrator's feeling for the little girl.
She's got a lot to carry, hasn't she?
She has. I always used to say that the positive value in my father's work is decency, but the positive value in my work is innocence. I do value it, perhaps inordinately, and she embodies that in the book. I think Sam, the narrator, is articulately moral. I think he knows exactly what he's doing. There's no fudging there, I don't think.
Is it perhaps not rather easy to have innocence reside within a child, not within the adult world that you're describing?
Well, I think you'd be hard-pressed to write a book about an innocent grown-up these days. I mean, part of the question is that the period of innocence is contracting all the time, as anyone with young children knows. Innocence is being threatened from every direction.
I must say that I found most of your characters quite unappealing, and I wondered why I enjoyed the book so much. I really did enjoy it, but I couldn't understand why I cared what was happening to them. I don't think the world is like that. I mean, I don't really think people like Keith and Nicola truly exist. I wondered if you really did think that either, or is it just a way of writing a good book?
Well, I think the answer to the first part of your question is that Nabokov said, when you read Anna Karenina, don't identify with Anna or Vronsky. Never identify with the character. Identify with the author. What's the author trying to do? And having done that, it ceases to matter really whether it's an accurate portrayal of the real-life equivalent. It's not a question of that. My characters might as well have T-shirts with, bitch or swine written on them. Subtle characterization is not my thing. Banalities delivered with tremendous force is more what I'm interested in. Exaggeration and the freedom that gives you to be funny. So they're cartoon characters in that sense.
I felt your characters seemed quite stuck in their own grooves within the storyline, and to some extent, therefore, without hope. And I wondered what your message for the reader was around hope.
Well, I mean, if you look at the ending, you'll see that, in a way, it's like the Tale of Two Cities. The narrator, as it were, gives up his life so that Guy will remain free. He doesn't do the murder. He's liberated from that role. And the deal is that he looks after the little girl and the mother. That's the compact he makes with Guy. So that is perspective and looking forward and preserving that little bit of innocence that is somewhere in this great morass. So I think there's hope in that sense.
I just wanted to go back to the babies, specifically Marmaduke, and
This is the child from hell.
the child from hell is specifically what I'm wanting to talk about. Yeah, just the close proximity between the baby and sort of, for want of a better phrase, maybe nuclear holocaust. And can you elaborate a bit on that? And just, what this child is embodying. I mean, it's quite, it's quite a baby. And
the baby is whom we first glimpse eating his nappy. He's meant to be a satirical look at the male drives. Wars and nuclear weapons are male pursuits. They should have over the Pentagon they should have pueri semper pueri. Boys will be boys. That's what it's always been about. And I was trying to look at that male principle in its root.
So is Marmaduke teaching the male world a lesson then, by biting them on their Achilles' heel?
And eating his nappy at the same time.
He sees a spectacular warning that boys, in his case, aren't very nice at all right from the word go. And it may seem a huge leap to connect him with a 20 megaton warhead coming at you, but it does spring from the same thing.
Well, I thought so. That's what I'm saying.
If Marmaduke represents male drives, I hope you don't think Nicola represents female drives.
Well, no, you're doing very well with little Kim there. Nicola stands very much opposed to the family and to reproduction in general. That is, one of the reasons why she's bowing out, is because she has no feminine future that she can imagine.
Could you elaborate on the aspects of Nicola that you wouldn't wish to be associated with?
I wouldn't wish to be associated with a single thing about Nicola. The only sympathetic moment was when she was actually bored and embarrassed by trying to pretend to be good to Guy, a conversation in the park, and she found that tedious. And she was actually getting weary with it. And there, for a moment, you saw an insight. Otherwise, I couldn't have any insight into her. I thought she was absolutely dreadful and wondered why you created her and what she was telling us about anything.
Going back to a previous question, did you enjoy reading about the exploits of a character whom you loathed?
No, I found it quite difficult. I liked the background of this book and its structure. The humour was wonderful, but I found it was not. I didn't want to know what happened to the three main characters because I didn't care about them at all, I'm afraid.
Answer.
You're reading for things I never pretended to give. My novels are not full of people you're meant to care about in that kind of way. They're not your friends or neighbours. They are made up. They're there to serve other purposes other than to win your affection.
In counterpoint to that, in the youthful sort of femininity of Kim and her innocence, do you think she's enough to provide redemption into the third millennium?
Well, again, it's if Marmaduke is a nuclear weapon, then she can serve, as beauty and innocence, as clutched at by the narrator in particular. London fields, they're force fields of neutrality, or good, evil, innocence, and these are the places where characters wreck each other. And this is the only example in the book of the opposite process.
How do you look back on the London that you envisaged in 1989 as being the London of 10 years hence? As you look back on it now, I mean, we've made a few references to the odd things, mobile phone, Concorde and so on, fairly sort of minor little accoutrements in a way. But in broader social terms, was it better or worse than you had envisaged at the time?
Well, better, but perhaps less interesting from a writer's point of view. A writer doesn't want a society to be prosperous and calm and just.
And boring.
And boring, a bit like a efficiency state like Switzerland. You want savage inequalities and sort of rumblings of discontent, which are no longer heard here. So I'm a bit depressed about that.
I was interested in the idea of the writer in this, because it seemed to me that the other topic here, it seems to me, is writing itself. And that you seem to be saying that after the Holocaust, writers didn't have anything to write about anymore. And you've got a writer who's kind of literally lost the plot in that he can't make anything up anymore. And I was wondering if you thought that the sort of novel was at a dead end.
I don't think it is. I also think the 20th century novel is infinitely greater than the 19th century novel. And if the novel does disappear, that will be its golden age, and not what came earlier. This novel is slightly postmodern in that it shows you the workings from the inside. Postmodern architecture has all its drain pipes, and everything sticking out. But I do think postmodernism has had its day, and that the novel is poised to move on to something else. And I think that something else will be science. You always know a new evolution in the novel is taking place because very overworked fiction reviewers start complaining about this. Can we please have a moratorium on novels about science? Because they think it's a fashion. It always does look like a fashion when this evolutionary change begins. But it's not a fashion. It's an inevitability, an evolutionary inevitability. And
the last piece in the book, the last end paper, is a letter to Mark Asprey, who's a novelist who is in Sam's flat. His initials are M.A. I mean, is that one of your jokes?
Well, actually, the opening note is not from me. It's from Mark Asprey.
Ah.
It's often put on the wrong side of the title page, which is disastrous because it's part of the body of the work. And what's happened is that Mark Asprey has come back to the flat and found the novel and found the intervening material, which is the narrator's little chapters between the chapters, and stitched it all together and brought it out under the pseudonym of Martin Amis.
Well, we'll assume that it's not Mark Asprey, but the real Martin Amis that we've got with us today. Thank you, whoever you are, for being our guest on Book Club this month.